Chair, I'm not sure about Chris Windows. He's there on the screen, but I'm not sure if he's able to hear or see us because it's just his picture.
Well, we'll have to live with that. Have you transferred the hosting?
Chair, I'm not sure. Can you all put your... He's there on the screen, but I'm not sure if he's able to hear or see us because it's just his picture.
Well, we'll have to live with that. Have you transferred the hosting?
Chair, I'm not sure. I don't know what's going on. Can you all put your... He's there on the screen, but I'm not sure if he's able to hear or see us because it's just his picture.
Well, we'll have to live with that. Have you transferred the hosting?
Chair, I'm not sure. I don't know what's going on. Can you all put your... He's there on the screen, but I'm not sure if...
Can you transfer the hosting over to me, please? I'll just exclude him. Admin. Okay, host. Okay. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to Development Control A. Would you please ensure that your microphones are muted, please, if you're not actually speaking? Welcome, everyone, members of the committee, officers, and those viewing on the YouTube channel. I've got a few things to say before we move to the formal agenda for today's meeting. First of all, I'm Councillor Don Alexander, Councillor for Avonmouth and Lawrence Weston, and I'm Chair of Development Control A. The formal legal standing of the meeting. This meeting is being held under Government Statutory Instruments, Local Government England, the Local Authorities Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authority Meetings England Regulations 2020. To take account of these regulations, Bristol City Council has produced a set of virtual meetings procedure rules, and these are available on our website. This means that the decisions made by the committee will have the same standing and validity as if they had been made at a meeting in City Hall. Members of public who have submitted written public forum statements, I can confirm not only that your statements have been circulated to all members in advance of the meeting, but also that all members have read those statements. And these will be taken into account when the decisions are made. And I've also asked officers who are presenting reports to particularly address the concerns reflected in those public forum statements. We do not, however, at this stage, have the facility to enable any members of the public to address the committee. Members of the public, although you will see a number of different people on your screen during the course of the meeting, only myself and the other councillors will make the decision on each application. Members of the committee, would you please ensure that your sound is muted when you're not speaking? When you have spoken, please remember to mute your sound again. When you wish to speak, would you please indicate by using the Zoom raised hand facility? And I will invite each one of you to speak by way of a queue system. When you speak, if you do not have the councillor prefix on your Zoom nameplate, would you please introduce yourself as councillor and your name? If you are leaving the meeting or returning to the meeting, would you please ensure that I'm fully aware of this by requesting to speak? And I understand that 2 members of the committee will later on be recusing themselves from the meeting. Moving a vote. When moving a vote, would you please indicate, as above, you wish to speak? That's with the virtual hand, and wait until I ask you to speak. Please then clearly state what you are moving, particularly for the benefit of the public. The first vote for each application will of course be the officer recommendation as per our normal procedure. If you are seconding a motion, please again clearly indicate you wish to speak and wait for me to call you. This again is particularly for the benefit of the public. Voting. I will call each councillor in turn by name. Please state clearly if your vote is for, against, or abstain. This will ensure that the vote is accurately recorded by the clerk and enable members of the public to properly observe the vote. We will now move to the formal agenda, but are there any questions regarding that procedure from councillors? Okay. We now move to the agenda for our meeting today. Do we have any apologies for absence or substitutions?
Chair, I haven't been given any apologies, but I do know that Councillor Stephen Clark has not yet arrived, so I'm not sure if he's going to be attending or not.
I'm here.
Oh, are you? Oh, sorry. I hadn't realised you were there. In that case, I think we've got 11 members then, Chair.
Okay, so we have no apologies and no substitutions. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chair, yeah.
Great, thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? I have Councillor Clive Stevens virtually waving at me. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm stepping down from the second agenda item, lost and found. So I won't be on committee. I would have spoken against it, and I have submitted a statement against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I'm in exactly the same situation as Clive Stevens. I objected to the second item, and so I'm already prejudiced against it.
Thank you. I now move to the minutes of the previous meeting. I've already had by email from Councillor Fabian Breckles a couple of observations of things that he felt that he said in the previous meeting. Councillor Breckles, would you like to just say what they were?
Yeah, it was basically, I had explicitly said about the shuttle service that we needed, buses to shuttle people from around Bristol, the suburbs as well as the city centre. And that was the first point. For example, if you've got a lot of people turning up going from St George, it makes sense to have a shuttle bus to pick them up and take them straight there and bring them straight back to St George and keep out the centre. The other point I asked was I requested that officers would bring back to this committee updates on how the negotiations on transport provision and the public transport provision for the arena was proceeding, so that we could address any issues and snags as they came up.
Thank you. I remember those as well. Are we happy to amend the minutes in accordance with those two suggestions from Councillor Breckles? Some nodding. Could you nod? Is that all right? You're okay. Good. Thumb up. Thank you, Councillor Shah. Great. Okay, then the minutes are amended. So we move on. I forgot, I think, to welcome our officers. And Gary, would you like to go through the appeals that we have at the moment, please?
Certainly, Chair. So let me share my screen and I'll show the list that we've got at this meeting. If you could just bear with me. It might be I've got too many things open, so we just bear with me just a moment. I'll try and get that up so everyone can see what I'm talking to. Let me just give that another go. Sorry, frustratingly, it's not letting me. Just let me close a couple of other things down as well. Here we go. So apologies for that. I'll just talk members through and those watching what the report, how it's set out, just as an introduction. And basically every committee meeting we circulate to members a list of all the appeals that are with the planning inspectorate at the moment. These are appeals against normally decisions that the council has made, normally under delegated powers, but quite often under from committee decisions as well. And as members will be aware as well, sometimes we get appeals lodged where we haven't made a decision, where the statutory time period has expired. So they're set out in this order. So we list them first as householder appeals. They're dealt with as a fast track approach by the planning inspectorate. Then we come to appeals that have been lodged and where the planning inspectorate have agreed to consider the appeal via an informal hearing. And you'll see there are a number under this category, all relating to the same site. And these are the ones I was going to bring to your attention. So this is items 7 through to 13, and you'll see they all relate to different parts of Hamilton House in Stokes Croft. Members of the committee may be aware the building has been the subject of a lot of activity between tenants and the building's owners. We had an appeal in the last year which was dismissed, and that this is where the developer, the site owner, seeks to use the fast track prior approval process to change the use of the building from office to dwelling houses, which has happened across the city. However, one of the key aspects of that is that the existing building has to lawfully be in Class B1 use. So when we had an application for an entire block, I think it was Block C, it was refused under delegated powers because it wasn't in lawful B1 use. That was appealed, and the planning inspector agreed with the council that it could not be proven that it was in lawful B1 use. As you can see here, so the site owner has now gone for a approach of almost going floor by floor, and in some aspects of Block B as well, to try and get individual prior approvals for different parts of the building. As you can see, they were all refused. They've all been appealed against, and the hearing is currently set for the 5th of May, albeit we will be seeking an update from the planning inspectorate. I'm sure we already have, because I would doubt whether that hearing is actually going to take place on that date. So as and when we get a new date, we will let you know via this paper. And then also, if we get any appeals that are being dealt with through the public inquiry process, again, that would be listed in this report, but there's none under that category this time around. And then we come on to the written representation route, where the council and the appellants just submit statements to the planning inspectorate, and an inspector does a site visit and decides. And you'll see there's a whole list of these here, where we are waiting for decisions. And then the final part of the report is the list of appeal decisions, and you'll see there obviously you've got the ward, the address, and then on the right, key thing, which is the date of decision and what the outcome was. So appeal dismissed means that the council won the argument there, that the appeal has been dismissed and planning permission refused. And then you come down, so I'm glad to say largely dismissed, but now and again, such as the one on Clouds Hill Avenue there, that's where the council's arguments weren't accepted, and the planning inspector decided to allow the appeal and grant planning permission. So that's the decisions that will be made. None of any specific interest I wanted to bring to the committee's attention. And just one additional thing that members will be familiar with: if in the case where costs are applied for, we also report under the decision what the outcome of that was. So it'll either say costs awarded or costs not awarded. But as you can see from the report today, there are none under that category. So that's a fairly brief talk through, Chair, of the structure of the report and the particular ones of interest at Hamilton House.
Thank you, Gary. Broadly looking very good. Do members have any questions regarding the appeals? No? Okay. And we move on now to enforcement cases, Gary, please.
Okay, similarly, I'll share that as well. That's worked a lot more quickly, that's good. So again, for explanation, at every committee meeting, we provide a list of notices served across the city since the last time that this particular committee met. So members will see that since the last meeting, we have actually served 4 notices regarding a range of developments across the city. This is to kind of demonstrate enforcement action that's being taken. Members will be aware that, you know, our preference is to negotiate solutions, seek regularisations, but if something has been carried out that isn't acceptable in planning terms and is not being voluntarily reversed, then we will serve formal notices. Just an important bit of commentary to give on these at this point in time is that 2 of the notices do relate to commercial premises. So that's the one on Gloucester Road, the canopy structure, and also the one on North Street in Bedminster. Now, what we wanted to do was just to stress that whilst we are there to enforce the planning system, we are sensitive to these difficult times in terms of commercial premises. So I've asked the enforcement team leader as to where we are with those. I understand that the air conditioning unit has already been removed, so there's no issue with that anymore. That's been complied with. The canopy structure on Gloucester Road, that's a recently served notice. There is, I think, a 3-month compliance period, but obviously it's a very difficult time for businesses at the moment. We will take a reasonable approach to compliance with that notice, bearing in mind the situation that we're all in at the moment. So just wanted to provide that reassurance. Also, though, we went through appeals. It is possible for all of these notices to be appealed. Should that be the case, and what the effect that has is that if there's a compliance period of, say, 3 months on a notice, then that gets sort of frozen until the appeal's decided. So it might be the case that some of these notices are appealed, which would have the effect of giving them more time to comply with the notice in the event that the notice is upheld by the planning inspector. So I just wanted to give that broader commentary on enforcement notices and the approach we're taking at the moment.
Thank you, Gary. Do we have any questions from councillors on enforcement, please? Okay, I see no hands. Thank you. So we move then to the first of our 2 items on the agenda, which is ground floor, Unity 1 and 2 Vintry building, 20 to 21 Wine Street, BS1 2BD. I have a number of public forum statements, which you've all seen and read. These are from, and I will list the people who have sent in public forum statements. As usual, I apologise for my mispronunciation of anybody's name. Mr. Keith Rundle, Ada Cohen and G. Petrini, Lynn Jones, Ian Appley, Karen Appley, Tom Dixon, Russ and Lucille Leaf, Matthew Norris, Councillor Paul Smith, Stuart Fries, and Councillor Kai Dudd. And as I've said previously, I've asked officers in their report to kind of notably address the concerns that have been brought up in those public forum statements, and I'm sure they will. So first of all, we go to the officer's report on that first item. Gary, could you hand this over, please, to the officer who will be explaining this to us?
Certainly. This is a new application to the committee, unlike the second item. So I won't steal Ben's thunder any more than that. I'll hand over to Ben to present this item.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Allow me to try and share my screen. Hopefully you will see a shared screen. No. Are you seeing the shared screen?
Yes.
Okay, so right, the application relates to two ground floor units within the Vintry building at 22 Wine Street with street access and active frontage. It sits in the designated Wine Street secondary shopping frontage and is within the primary shopping area of Bristol city centre. The application proposes the unification of two existing units in A1 and A3 use into one larger unit and a change of use to A3, A4, D2, a community studio space with associated restaurant and bar to be used for producing multidisciplinary live experiences such as theatre, physical performance, exhibitions, talks and lectures, and music, as well as dining experiences. The application was called in by a ward councillor due to concerns regarding late night bar element and event space immediately below residential flats. With regards to the public forum and consultation, the application was advertised by letter to neighbouring properties and a site notice and press advertisement were issued. A summary of the key reasons for objection and for supporting the application during the consultation phase of determining the application is included in the full officer's report. There have been 13 objections to the application and 20 representations in support of the proposal. And then of the 11 statements submitted for today, 3 are in support, 6 against, and 2 local councillor statements. The key reasons for support are that the application would strengthen the cultural offering of the city and revitalise this part of the local economy. The key reason for opposing the application relates to the amenity issues to the nearby residential units at Southey House, generated from noise inside and outside the proposed event space. So the key issues, if I just go back to the slide, just to show you the site location. So it's just opposite Castle Park on Wine Street. And the 2 units are at the side closest to the pit hay, set away from Southey House. And there's a view of the 2 units in question. So as I mentioned earlier, the reason for the call-in was concerns to do with amenity. On that note, various objections were received with regards to noise from both inside and outside the application site, as well as concerns regarding litter and late night disturbance. It should be noted that a number of objections state the application site is directly below residential dwellings. The residential dwellings are in fact in the adjoining building further along the terrace at Southey House, which was converted from office to residential use under permitted development and prior approval in 2013. The nearest residential dwellings are approximately 30 metres from the application site. There are 2 commercial units between the application site and the residential building, and the floors above the application site are in commercial use as offices. The pollution control officer has been engaged with this application and has provided comments on revised plans. The revisions were made to strengthen the sound insulation proposed for the event space. Conditions have also been suggested that would ensure that any sound transfer levels are tested prior to the space becoming operational to ensure that the amenity of the neighbouring residential properties are protected. The maximum capacity of the unit would be 275 persons, including staff, and 142 in the event space of the studio. Officers have also agreed revisions to the proposed opening times, which would now be 6:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, and 6:30 a.m. to 1 a.m. on Friday and Saturday nights. In addition, there will be no utilisation of the pavement or any outdoor area for smoking or congregating. Following the revisions that were secured, officers concluded that no unacceptable harm to the amenity of nearby occupiers would result from the proposed development, subject to the suggested conditions being met. With regards to the principle of the change of use, officers have assessed whether the proposed change of use from a retail and cafe to a restaurant, bar and community space is acceptable. The proposed change of use would result in the loss of 2 established retail units. Both units are currently vacant and have most recently been used as a coffee shop and a bakery, providing hot and cold food and drinks. Evidence has been provided as part of the application that demonstrates there is limited demand for retail units in their current use class, and that is accepted by officers. It's also clear that there would remain several vacant units within this secondary frontage area. The design statement explains that the space will be used as a creative studio, devising and producing multidisciplinary live experiences such as theatre, physical performance, music and composition, exhibitions, talks, workshops and dining experiences. And following assessment against the relevant policies, officers have concluded that the principle of the change of use in this part of the city centre is acceptable. Transport Development Management Team have confirmed that they raise no objection to this application, which is in a highly sustainable location close to local bus stops, taxi ranks and publicly accessible car parks. There are no concerns with regards to design, and following consultation with the Police Crime Reduction Unit, there is no objection raised with regards to crime or antisocial behaviour. In conclusion, officers recommend approval of this application.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions, please? Right, I have a hand up, and that's Councillor Steve Smith.
Thank you. With regard to the issue of noise out on the street, the report says that because it's a busy area already, it's not thought that it would cause any additional noise or unacceptable noise. Has any evidence been presented or any study been done to show that this is a busy area? Because a lot of the public forum statements from residents are saying actually it's very quiet tonight.
No actual study has been done, as far as I'm aware. I'm just trying to figure out how to stop sharing my screen, which is proving a bit of an issue for a second. As I understand it, the transport team have had a look at it and looked at the pattern of use of the area. So I can, there we go. Given the number of people using Corn Street and the venues available on Corn Street in the evening, and the number of people using the bus stops and walking through the city centre, I think it's a guesstimate. No formal study has been made.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that okay, Steve?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's fine.
Okay. Councillor Goggin?
Thanks, Chair. Just a brief question. The officer just mentioned that there was no designated outside area for smoking. Is it likely that people are still going to gather outside to do so?
I think people that want to go outside to smoke will do so. We've had assurances that there will be qualified door staff that will direct people away from Southey House towards Corn Street, and that there will be no designated smoking area on the pavement outside. I believe, although this isn't a planning issue, I believe that re-entry would not be possible after a certain time anyway, due to licensing laws. So later on in the evening, which is I think the time that people are most concerned about, people wouldn't be able to go out and then come back in.
Thank you.
Okay. I think Councillor Breckles.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Councillors Dowden Smith have both raised the issue of a floating PA system being conditioned. Has the sort of, has that been considered in the conditions on any further negotiations with the applicant so far? Or is that something that we're going to have to propose from the floor, as it were?
I think at this point, it might be an idea to pass this one over to our pollution control officer, who has been working with the applicant and looking at the sound insulation issues, if that's okay.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, thank you, Mark.
So in answer to your question, yes, that has been included in a condition. There is a condition which requires the applicant to comply with everything they've suggested they will do in their acoustic report. And the acoustic report basically details they will have an independent floating ceiling and an independent wall. Also that any speakers are hung on bespoke hangers, so again, separate from the structure of the building. And that is a requirement of a condition that has to be done. And then we've also got a condition on there that has to be tested afterwards to see that the desired noise levels are achieved in the residents' properties.
Okay, Councillor Shah.
Thank you, Chair. Fabian's stolen my thunder on the acoustic report, but I did raise this point in the test run meeting, just so that fellow members do also understand about the fact that it falls into a cumulative impact area as well, and the implications of that. So our fellow colleagues aware of the implications of it being in the CIA area.
Gary, would you like to comment on that, or is that?
Yes, certainly I can comment on that. This is one of those where you've got two areas of regulation, both administered by the council, but they're both going to be administered on their own merits and under their own legislation. So we're dealing with the planning side of things, and the licence is dealt with in a slightly different way, although it covers a number of very similar issues. And the tool that, one of the tools that licensing currently has is the cumulative impact area. And that will be something that the licensing committee will have to take into account before making its decision. Under planning, the cumulative impact area, whilst it's maybe an indicator of potential concentration, it isn't a tool that can be used by the local planning authority. Instead, we have to use the established, local plan policies that Ben's referred to in his report, and also the more detailed assessments that are we get the applicants to carry out, and then we verify as well that, and then Mark's just spoken to that as well. So we almost have to take it step by step, really, and that the committee has to make this decision based upon the local plan policies, and then ultimately it's the licensing committee will then have to make a decision on the license and its more detailed requirements, and the licensing committee is the body that has the CIA as a tool.
Thanks, Gary. Could you lower your virtual hand if you do not wish to speak, please, just so it helps me administratively here. I have now Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Two questions, if I may, both triggered by the public forum statements. Matthew Norris says that Wine Street is an established residential area. I'm sure he's not necessarily referring to planning designations, but do we know how many people or dwellings, residential dwellings there are in that street, please?
To my knowledge, Wine Street is a commercial street. The residential units are at Suddy House, and that was converted under prior notification from an office building. The street has secondary frontage and is within the city centre location, so we would expect along here commercial activity at ground floor level, certainly with offices above. It was a 2013 application that saw that next door building converted to residential use, but when assessing this application, I think we have to treat Wine Street as a commercial street within the city centre.
Okay, so that deals with the specific planning allocation, which doesn't surprise me, but how many people, how many dwellings are there on the upper floors?
I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. All I can say is that there are 2 commercial units between the application site and the wall of Southey House. I have a feeling it's 40, but again, those flats will be at the front, back and side of that building, so they will differ greatly in the distance from the application site.
Okay, thanks. So you don't know, but that's all right. So my second question, Chair, if I may, comes to, and it relates to people living around there, and that's numbers of people exiting Wine Street. A number of people have said that it's busy up until about 11 o'clock and then it goes quiet. So although it might be noisy during the day and in the evening, after 11, according to the public statements, it goes quiet. And therefore, 200 people leaving at 11:30 or on a Friday or Saturday, well, in fact, the mornings at 1 a.m. would make quite a difference to the noise levels and might bring acceptable harm to amenity. So what studies have you done on the noise levels that time of night, please?
I will have to defer that one over to Mark, if that's all right, to discuss more about the noise impact assessment. What I would say is that we have revised the opening hours, the proposed opening hours down. Originally, the application was for closing at 1 a.m. 7 days a week. We have revised that down Sunday to Thursday to 11 p.m. so that it's in line with the pubs and the other nearby venues on Corn Street, for example. And on Friday and Saturday nights, you would expect more late night travel, people going to bars and clubs on weekend nights. So for that reason, we have amended the proposed opening hours. But if I could hand that one over to Mark to discuss the noise impact assessment.
Yeah, so I've just checked back on the acoustic report and I've also looked on our online mapping thing. So one of the questions was how many flats in Southey House. I've checked that and that is 33 flats in that building. With regards to the acoustic assessment submitted with the application only deals with the noise from within the building itself and plant noise at the rear. There's been no study on noise from customers leaving that premises and how loud that is at that time of night, I'm afraid.
That's fine, thank you very much. All we can ask for are the facts. I finished, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Stephen Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Both Paul Smith and Kai Dudd make the point that they like this applicant, but they're worried that this applicant may not be there in the long term. And Kai Dudd suggests, I think I know the answer to this, but Kai Dudd suggests that we somehow try and tie the applicant into the application. I don't think that's possible, is it, Gary?
Well, myself and Ben have been discussing this today, actually, having read the statements. It's unusual. It's not ideal because planning should deal with buildings and sites, but it is possible, particularly where if you're dealing with perhaps an untried or untested use. So this interesting mix of use is being proposed here. And there's a quite detailed management arrangement for this as well, and I can understand the fears that residents and board members would have about this, in the way that both members have articulated in their statements about, yes, this seems fine, but what if someone else takes over, just benefiting from the use class? So it's an unusual thing to do, but it is possible. But we have floated this potential idea with the applicants of a personal permission. So that if members feel very strongly on that point, then it's something that we could add as a condition.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just come back. So that's interesting, and it might be something I propose in the next stage of these discussions. Thank you. Don, you're muted.
Sorry, yes. Councillor Shah, do you still have your hand up?
Sorry, Chair, it should be down. So
okay, no problem, no problem. So that is all the questions as far as I can see. Am I right about that? Yes. Okay, great. Then we move to the discussion. Would anyone like to open up the discussion? I have Councillor Steve Smith first.
Thank you, Chair. So for me, my main concern, as indicated by my question earlier, is the external noise generated by this. I think the internal stuff can be conditioned with the floating whatsits, but noise in the street can't. The report, I think, accepts that there will be noise generated by this, but says that it's acceptable because the street's already busy, it's a city centre area. On that point, I'm afraid I disagree. A lot of the public forum statements tell us, as Clive has said, that late at night it is a quiet road. I've been down there late at night myself, and I agree it is quiet. You've got closed shops on one side and a park on the other, and not a lot going on. And if you chuck 275 people out into that street at 1 o'clock in the morning, it's inevitably going to create noise. And that's perfectly normal in some parts of the city centre, not that far away from here. On Corn Street, that's what happens. That's part of the nighttime economy. But on this road, I don't think it is normal. And I think for me, then, that is a loss of amenity to the existing residents, which isn't acceptable. So while I think the idea of this is fantastic, and I really like what they're suggesting, I don't think this is the right place for it. And so I won't be supporting it.
Okay. Mark Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I agree a lot with what Steve Smith said. I do greatly appreciate the applicant bringing their times in to 11 o'clock on school nights, as it were. That shows a degree of compromise, at least, and I think that's helpful. The problem I have is that this is a new applicant and a new use, and I think in a sensitive area like this, it's not right to give them free rein at this point on Friday and Saturday night and say, well, we'll tackle this problem if it turns out to be noisy. I think we should be having this the other way around, which is to say, you should have a tight set of times to start with, and if you behave and if you're a good neighbour, then in a year when you try to extend your opening time on Friday and Saturday night, I'm sure it won't be a problem. I probably could have just about accepted a midnight Friday and Saturday, but I'm afraid I can't really accept a 1 o'clock. So I'm going to have to vote no on this, which is kind of a shame. But maybe if they come back again with all earlier times, it will be all right.
Okay. Councillor Breckles.
Oops. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the conditions, I think there's condition 10 is about the opening times. So I'm sure if we wanted to, we could amend it and bring it down to midnight Friday and Saturday. I would have no problem with that. I think I note that the the councillors Dodd and Smith would like to see a floating PA system. I know speakers and walls and ceilings have been mentioned. I think that should be spelled out as well. One thing I do think we have to bear in mind, especially given the potential economic consequences of the lockdown, it's going to be very tough. It's been very tough for retail for years anyway. And I think that we are going to find that we have surplus retail units that are going to have to be repurposed. And I think if we're wondering about noise and stuff, this is like, you know, a space that plans to do theatre performances and things like that, and art exhibitions. And I'm wondering whether we should be comparing the impact to more places like the Tobacco Factory, which isn't a million miles away from homes and can be quite busy. You know, some of the theatre performances could be packed out. So I'm thinking that the sort of kind of noise and the kind of clientele, the noise that's going to be made will be dependent on the type of clientele. And it sounds like they're not attracting the pub and club lot from what they plan to be doing with the space. I think I could quite happily support a rolling back of the opening times on Friday and Saturday with a view that, yeah, as Councillor Writer said, if they behave themselves for a year or two, then we can look at rolling it back to 1 o'clock. But apart from that, you know, and if there's support for that, I might propose that. But apart from that, I think this is we are going to have to look at being brave and repurposing sites that will otherwise sit and rot. It is 30 metres away from any residential, and it is a sort of a secondary street that's a bit dead. And you know, if it just ends up they stay empty units and then other units close, we could just end up with a whole street of empty units. And I don't think that's good for us. And I think so. I'm going to be supporting this, but I may well suggest some amendments to the conditions.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. So I think opening hours after 11 o'clock at night create unacceptable harm to amenity. But I think I would listen and possibly even support a later time on a Friday or Saturday night. I had written down 11:30. Others have suggested midnight. I'll listen to advice, but 1 a.m. is too late. I think if we did that, and whether we have to reject or whether it becomes a cooling off and come back with a revised proposal in 6 weeks' time, I'll let Gary tell us. That for me is the critical thing. It's the noise when people leave. And there could be more houses or flats in those areas as things get converted over time and retail runs down and offices get converted. So for me, I'm against the application as it currently stands. If somebody is allowed to amend it, I might support it.
Okay. If I could just throw in my 2 pennyworth, we must be careful not to be the licensing committee as well as the planning committee, I think. Councillor Davis?
Thank you. Well, I think when we have a lot of events, entertainment, cultural venues closing, this application's very welcome. I don't think it's a particularly inappropriate location for this kind of use, so I'm going to be supporting this.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments before I invite someone to make a proposal?
Chair, I think I've got my hand up.
Oh, sorry. Could people please take their hands down? Could everyone take their hands down, please, and then put them up again if they've got something to say? Because I'm slightly okay. So, Councillor Smith, do you have a comment, or do you wish to propose something? Does anyone have comments?
Yes.
Steve Smith, do you want to say something, or is it a proposal?
Sorry, I'd lowered my hand once. I think I clicked the button by mistake to raise it again.
Oh, sorry, I've got Stephen. Right. Okay. Stephen Clark, would you like to propose something?
No, I'm still at the making a comment.
The comment. Welcome. Make a comment, please.
This is an interesting road, really. It's a kind of transition road, isn't it? It's sort of neither one thing or another in a way. I mean, Starbucks wasn't able to survive here, so I don't think we're going to be seeing a lot of retail here in the near future. I mean, yeah, we all support arts, creative community use of buildings. I think I'm prepared to take a chance on this. I agree with Mark Wright and others that have said that 1 o'clock is too late. If we can come down to 12, that would suit me. I also quite like the idea that that Paul Smith and Kai Dudd have said about trying to link this application into the applicants rather than the building. So I'm interested in exploring that idea. But broadly, if this can be changed, then I will support it.
Okay, so according to our procedure, we first of all vote. Invite anyone to propose the officer's recommendation. Does anyone wish to propose the officer's recommendation? Councillor Shah wishes to propose the officer's recommendation. Is that correct?
I actually had a comment.
Oh, sorry,
yeah.
Councillor Shah, make your comment then, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was just that I was told to lower my hand and raise it again.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So, just to pick up on the point that has already been made by Councillor Smith and Councillor Dudd's statements in terms of linking this to the proprietors, I think there's an added incentive for them to actually make it work, especially with the local neighbourhood, and ensure that there's a lot of amenities there. But also, given the current context of the nighttime economy in Bristol, which is a major contributor to the city's economic well-being, I think that we have to be mindful of the effects that empty retail spaces could potentially have on there. So I'm actually minded to support this. I mean, I know, wearing my licensing hat, that the Association of Licensed Multiple Retailers in one of their reports said that the number of nighttime venues in the past decade has actually gone down by about half. So it's to actually stem that flow, and just to understand that also it's a major boon for Bristol. Bristol's actually renowned for its nighttime and creative sectors, which includes arts as well. So I am minded to actually support this, but I think it would be better if we could actually tweak it to a midnight closure, midnight hours, as opposed to 1 a.m.
You're muted, Don.
Thank you. Thank you. Could you put your hand up if you want to make any more comments, please? And take it down if you want to propose something. Then I can see. Okay, Councillor Windows, you'd like to make a comment. Councillor Windows.
Thank you, Chair. I was unmuting myself or whatever it is. I'd just like to say that I feel we should be very careful, as you've already mentioned, not to cross over into licensing details. I'm sure this will come before the licensing committee. I appreciate what's been said already as far as the timings are concerned, and they are my concerns also, but I think we should deal with the application before us and leave licensing to do their job. If we can do that, I'm prepared to support the application.
There speaks a member of licensing committee. Councillor Paul Goggin.
Thanks, Chair. As another member of the licensing committee, again, I would just second the comments that Councillor Windows has just made. I think we should make the decision on the building and the planning rather than the licensing hours.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, does anybody else have any more comments to make? No? Okay. In that case, I invite anyone who wishes to propose that we accept the officer recommendation first of all, and we will test the water on that. Councillor Breckles, do you propose that?
Well, I wanted to propose a slight amendment to the officer recommendation and slight alteration to the conditions.
Can we test the officer recommendation first? And then we will ask for amendments if that falls.
Well, I was just trying, if you want to do it that way, but I wanted to propose some amendments to the conditions.
Okay, let's test the officer recommendation. That, Gary, is our procedure, is it not?
It is, Chair. I think that's probably the cleanest way of dealing with it. What you've got there is a officer recommendation in front of you. The hours are as set out. It isn't currently a personal permission, so perhaps test the water with that, which is our agreed procedure, and then depending on what happens then, if such a motion fails, then obviously another member could move a motion that could involve permission, but with amended conditions to reflect a lot of the discussion that's taken place.
Okay. In that case, do I have a proposal that we accept the officer recommendation? I have from Paul Goggin a proposal, I think. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Goggin proposes. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Breckles, do you second? Your hand is up.
No, I wanted to, I'm going to not second this one because I want to come back and propose some amendments.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Windows, are you seconding?
Yes, I will second that motion.
Okay, then we have a proposer and a seconder to accept the officer recommendation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go round the councillors one by one, and I will ask Norman to clerk the responses we've received from each of the councillors. So the proposal is to accept the officer recommendation. Councillor Windows, you, I presume, do, because you have proposed it.
I do.
Councillor Shah, for, against, or abstain?
For.
Or Councillor Stevens, for, against, abstain?
Against.
Councillor Breckles?
Against at this point.
Councillor Hickman?
For.
Councillor Wright?
Against.
Councillor Davis?
For.
Councillor Clark?
Against.
Councillor Goggin?
For.
Councillor Smith?
Against.
Against. And myself, for. Where does that leave us, Norman?
So that's 6 for and 5 against.
In that case, it is the officer's recommendation is approved. Thank you. We move on to the next item on the agenda, which is 85 Queens Road, Clifton, Bristol, BS81US. I have public forum statements from Councillor Mark Wright, Simon Ather, Councillor Clive Stevens, Caroline Dix, and Jane Phillips. And so Councillor Councillors Wright and Stevens have offered to recuse themselves. So would you please close your audio and visual links, please?
Thank you, Chair. As this is the final item, I may as well leave the committee at this point. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye then. Okay. So Gary, would you like to lead us in the officer presentation of this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll do a little bit more of an introduction on this one. As you'll see from the report, this first came before the committee back in October last year, I think it was, where the decision was taken because there was uncertainty about the use in which the premises were currently being operated. So the deferral was based upon the enforcement team carrying out an investigation. As you can see from the report, that got to quite a formal stage in terms of serving a planning contravention notice, which is just it's a legal questionnaire, but it went beyond the kind of exchange of correspondence stage. But on the basis of that, officers were content that the use was being carried out in accordance with the permission granted on appeal a few years ago, which is also referred to in the report. So the advice that I would like to give members really before Susanna comes in and does the presentation on the item is, that issue, it was a point of debate back at the end of last year. It has been looked into, and really we don't have any evidence to suggest that it's anything other than a lawful restaurant. Obviously there are grey areas to all use classes, but this is operating within that lawful use. The other thing I just wanted to advise members on as well, and again this is set out in the report, is that this premises does have a track record in terms of appeals, and the most recent one related to the current use and hours of operation, where unfortunately we did lose an appeal. The appeal was allowed and costs were awarded against the council where we didn't have evidence to justify a refusal. So my sort of headline advice really is for the committee to avoid getting us into that set of circumstances again. But I'll hand over to Susanna now to talk you through the application and the issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gary. I'm just going to share my screen so you can see my presentation. That's the wrong one, sorry. Yeah, thank you. So as Gary's explained, this one was deferred last year from committee to allow time for the enforcement investigation to take place. That's taken place now, as Gary explained, and there's found to be no breach of planning. I just wanted to say that I've had a regard to all the public statements that were submitted and read them all. So as well as the consultation responses that are set out in the agenda report, where there are new issues raised in the public statements, I'll be referring to them in this presentation as well. But consultation did take place on the planning application, and there were 28 objections originally received, as well as the ones we've looked at today in the public statements. Sorry, I'm being told to change my slideshow. Has that changed anything?
No.
Sorry, Susanna, that's my fault. Just on the top tabs, if you click slideshow, hopefully it'll, and from beginning or from current, should make it bigger, or maybe it's not.
Yeah. I don't know why it's not doing it. I know what you mean.
Or maybe on the bottom right of the screen where it says, I think 50%, if you just make that bigger, it'll make the slide bigger within the...
If I may, I think if you've got more than one screen, you're probably sharing the presenter screen rather than sharing the presentation itself.
I think that's what I'm doing, yeah. Let me just try and change
it. In Zoom, you can choose which screen you share.
problem is when I share it, the Zoom goes away. So has that done anything? Because it's done it on my screen. It's now full screen.
I think we are where we were.
Right, okay.
But it is visible. Gary, are you able to share it? Yes, that's good.
Is that now full screen? Okay.
Yeah, somehow it came good.
Sorry about that. I don't know how that was going wrong there.
No problem.
Anyway, so I think I got to the fact that we'd had 28 objections in the previous application, and they're all described in the report. So I will talk about some of the comments that have been received in the public statements in this presentation. So here's the application site. It relates to Lost and Found, which is on the right of this photo, next door to Waitrose. So as we know, the proposals for an extension in the open hours, it's already open. It's been operating for a few months now, to a year. There's a license currently in place, which is based on the hours that were previously granted by a planning inspector. And as we've seen, the enforcement case resulted in there being no breach. So it was found that the premises is operating as an A3 restaurant and not a bar. It's in the West End area of the central area plan, and this slide shows that the designation is in a primary shopping area as well as a secondary shopping frontage, which is the blue line on this slide. And the red dot shows where the application site is. So it's expected that the area's got a number of commercial uses and a vibrant evening economy. But then, as we've seen also to the northwest of the site, there is a quiet residential street on Park Place, where there's a green and one pub, but it's mainly residential on that street, so it's a little bit quieter. I just want to draw attention to the committee report, which talks about the appeal, which is what we've referred to heavily in the assessment of this application, where the inspector allowed the appeal, and the decision was based heavily on the amount of evidence that was presented in the appeal. So there was found to be no evidence that would show a significant harm to immunity arising from the extended opening hours. And I'd also like to draw attention to the pre-commencement conditions that were mentioned in the report, which at the time of the previous committee, they hadn't been complied with, but now we've received acceptable information from the applicant on both odour management and staff cycle parking. So those conditions have now been discharged. We received a noise report and a management plan with the application, and the noise report measured the background noise in these 3 locations. And it also took a log of some of the activities that were witnessed throughout at different various hours of the night, and taking into account the background noise levels and also people being in high spirits in the area generally. It was found that the people exiting from Lost and Found wouldn't unacceptably increase the noise against the background noise level. So this is the evidence that we're referring to in the recommendation. And then the management plan that was submitted shows how the premises would be managed to avoid unacceptable disturbance in the area after hours. And they've said the applicants have given quite a detailed management plan that shows how there's a manager on the door that checks in everyone that's booked a table for a meal. People that attend the restaurant are encouraged to book a table rather than just turn up. And the doormen who are employed can turn away groups of people who are in high spirits, so that they can manage who's coming into the place. And they can also advise people on how to disperse when they're leaving the premises as well. So as with the appeal decision, that management plan and the noise plan, the noise assessment can be subject to the condition So any kind of antisocial behaviour is down to the management of the premises. So that management plan would stay with the premises in the grant of the planning permission. And I think, well, one of the comments in the public statements talks about the impact on health by increased noise levels. And there is the noise report that was submitted with the application does talk about the fact that there's no legislation that actually gives acceptable noise levels. So it's down to the assessment of each case. So there are no levels that are deemed to be acceptable and shouldn't be exceeded. And the pollution control officer has reviewed all this and is in agreement with the findings of the noise report. And Gary's explained what happens in the cumulative impact area. This site is in a cumulative impact area as well, and it's mainly down to licensing regime, but it is still a material consideration of a planning application. And as I said, there is a license in place for the approved hours currently, and the licensing regime just makes it easier to revoke a license if any unacceptable behaviour is witnessed. So that's mainly down to licensing and not planning. So this, just to recap on, these are the hours that are now proposed. So the application is only to change the hours. There are no other parts of development that relate to this application. And just to conclude, there have been no complaints made to the noise team, no complaints made to the police, and there haven't been any complaints made to the premises themselves. And it's these type of complaints or evidence that we would need if we wanted to refuse the application that would support a refusal at appeal. So as I say, there's been none of that type of evidence has been received. So the recommendation remains to grant planning permission for this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Councillor, questions now. Could you raise your hand, please, if you have a question? So I have Councillor Stephen Clark first.
Thank you, Chair. I think I know the answer to this, but I'm a bit confused about the relationship between planning and licensing. This is an application to change the hours. I understand that the planning permission that was granted included hours, but Gary, can you just explain the interrelationship between planning and licensing in an example like this?
Certainly. When we say on a regular basis, there's different regulatory regimes involved with something. What you're always looking for is at least a clear separation as to what that is. It quite often comes up with like building regulations. In this case, ours is probably, well, it's covered by both, so it doesn't help. So the licensing committee, if this proceeds at all, would look at this and look at it via the various licensing policies and approaches. In planning, amenity is a material planning consideration, so it is valid for a planning committee to have regard to that and to determine the hours of operation. So it's one of those issues that will go through two different regulatory regimes, both operated by the same local authority, but on slightly different bases. So it's a valid thing for the committee to look at the proposed extension of hours and have regard to the amenity issues. But I would say it has to be evidence-based.
So do you mean we could come to one decision about this and the licensing committee could overturn our decision?
No, that you could make different decisions, which is frustrating because, as I said, when you operate in different regulatory regimes, you want clean lines between the two, but this is where they overlap. And both committees, this committee and the licensing committee, are perfectly entitled to make their own decision, which could result in different decisions. But one doesn't override the other. to operate this business for these hours, the operator would need both planning permission in the form of the new permission that's scheduled out in the report and a new or amended licence. Of course, what they do have is a right to appeal against any refusal, but no, one doesn't override the other.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. In the public forum, I think it was Councillor Stevens' statement, he suggests a series of conditions that essentially try and make sure this is actually operating as a restaurant and not as a bar. I just wanted to check with the officers, are those conditions viable? Are they something that we could do, or does that overstep?
Yeah, well, so I'm just looking at them, getting them on the screen. So the first one was that on a Thursday, the premises should close at 11:30 or midnight. I mean, it's possible to change the hours through this decision that's made today, but the application has been made solely on the basis that the applicant wants these hours. So, but it is possible to change the hour on Thursday if that's deemed appropriate. Second one was that to be open till the kitchen should be open till 12:30 if the premises close at 1, so that the kitchen closes 30 minutes before the premises close. This came up during the assessment of the application, and the applicant, I went on site to meet them along with the pollution control officer and the police officer, and they actually, the way that the premises is operated is that the kitchen needs an hour to prepare the meal for the customer to then eat the meal. So it closing at 12:30 wouldn't actually give someone time to eat a meal, which would encourage people to just go in there to drink. So the kitchen has to close an hour before. And then I think in the management plan, it does say that no new customers would be admitted into the premises if at that hour. So the new people would be coming in if they've got a booking for so that there's enough time for them to consume a meal. So no new parties would be admitted after, say, 12 o'clock, if it's closing at 1. Does that make sense? It's not very clear the way I've described that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it does.
Okay. There's third one was no clients to be standing at bars or tables having drinks without food. Clients should be guided to tables to eat or asked to leave. Well, these aspects are more something for the management plan to control, and indeed the applicant has included that in the management plan. So there's a manager on the door that shows people to the tables. There is table service, and people are asked to leave when they have finished their meal. So that's the kind of aspect that the management is asked to cover, and that's what will be secured by a condition. And then the final one.
Sorry, just to clarify, because I think that was one of the key ones about this restaurant versus bar thing. So we could condition a management plan that says you have to eat, you can't just go and have a drink, and they would be in breach of their planning consent if they didn't do that. Is that right?
Well, there is a condition that secures the management plan that's been submitted, and that's included in the recommendation. And that management plan does set out how the premises are currently operated.
Yeah.
So there's a number of aspects in there that govern how they have committed to operating the premises. It doesn't specifically say no one's allowed in there unless they're eating, but it does show how they want to operate the premises as a restaurant, and that is their aim. And people are encouraged to make bookings to go in for a meal. Large groups of people without a booking on a Friday and Saturday night aren't normally admitted to the premises. And they have said in their statement that the premises have been operating like that since it's opened anyway, without any complaints. So that's how they want to continue to operate as a good neighbour.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Do we have any further questions? Then I will open up for councillor discussion. Please raise your hand if you would like to make a point. Councillor Smith.
Okay, me again. I'm in a real quandary with this one. I think it's one where perhaps law and real life collide, and we have to accept that legally this is a restaurant. It's been through the enforcement process, and that's what it is. But I don't think many people who weren't lawyers or planners would look at this and describe it as a restaurant. It's interesting hearing about the management plan. I went on their website yesterday, and despite the fact that it's closed, their reservation system is still running, and it quite happily offered me a reservation from 9 p.m. until closing for drinks only. There's nothing stopping you from going in there and just drinking. It described itself as a cocktail bar. So for me, if the definition of restaurant includes somewhere that you can just go and drink cocktails until 1 o'clock in the morning without ordering food, then I don't think a restaurant should be open until 1 o'clock in the morning right next to a residential block. And indeed, in the report, it says that other restaurants in the area aren't open at those times beyond 11 o'clock or midnight, particularly not on a Thursday night when nearby residents have got to get up on Friday morning and go to work or school or college or whatever. So if we can change the timings a bit like the last one, then possibly, but as this stands at the moment, I can't support it.
Thank you. Do we have other comments? Councillor Breckles.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, this has been, thoroughly investigated. There's no evidence of any wrongdoing. It's in an area where there is a lot of late night use only around the corner. I was reading some of the noise reports and findings in the officer report saying about how a lot of the noise was people walking past and walking down the street who'd had absolutely nothing to do with the restaurant. We've already lost an appeal on this lot. If there's no evidence of any wrongdoing, I see no reason to vote down the officer report. We could end up with another claim for damages. So I'm going to be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Yeah, I think maybe a good compromise would be that it closes at midnight on Thursday rather than opens till 1 a.m. on Thursday. Could Gary comment on that proposal? Is that reasonable, do you think, Gary?
I'd suggest the committee goes through the same process as the first application, in that you deal with the recommendation as it stands, and then if that doesn't succeed or isn't moved or seconded, then you can look at amendments. And I think, as Susanna has said, really, this application is all about the hours of operation. The use is already lawful, they're already operating. This is all about their aspirations, requirements to extend their hours. But obviously members are entitled to take a view on that. So if the recommendation isn't moved and the motion isn't successful, then I think that's clearly something that could be looked at and considered by the committee.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Goggin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm minded to support. However, I am worried. Councillor Smith raised the point about online bookings being available for drinks only. So that's put a little sort of bell going off in my head at the moment. And as Councillor Davis said, on a Thursday, perhaps it would be better to shut at midnight rather than 1. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no further hands raised. Could you please put your hand down if you... Councillor Breckles, do you wish to speak again? No, Councillor... Right, okay. In that case, I now have no hands raised. Is that correct? Nobody wishes to comment further. In that case, I'm looking for somebody to propose and somebody to second the officer recommendation. Councillor Windows, are you wishing to propose the officer recommendation? Councillor Windows?
Yes, I wish to propose the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Breckles, are you seconding the officer recommendation?
Yes, I am.
Okay, we will now take a vote on the officer recommendation to approve the officer recommendation. So if you wish to vote for, against or abstain, please say as I go round. I will go from councillor to councillor, beginning with Councillor Windows.
For.
Councillor Breckles.
For.
Councillor Shah.
For.
Councillor Hickman.
For.
Councillor Davis.
Against.
Councillor Clark.
Against.
Councillor Goggin.
Reluctantly for.
Councillor Smith.
Against.
And I vote for. Norman, could you give us the tally on that, please?
Sorry, I hadn't unmuted myself. Right, so Chair, so it's 6 for and 3 against the vote.
Okay, in that case, the officer's recommendation is approved. Our next meeting is on Wednesday, the 13th of May at 2 p.m. And I close by saying thank you very much to the councillors. Thank you to the officers of Development Management, Democratic Services, and those in IT who've supported us for this meeting. And I wish you a good rest of the day. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thanks all.